So, um, global clean energy purchases actually just dropped for the first time in nearly a decade.
Yeah, down about 10% in 2025.
Right. Which is huge. Yet, amidst that decline, massive corporations are somehow fighting harder than ever to sign these, 15-year energy contracts for power they will basically never physically use.
It's a massive contradiction.
It really is. So, welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening up this incredibly comprehensive 2026 report from Environment+Energy leader to really understand this corporate tug-of-war. We're looking at PPAs, or power purchase agreements.
Which is basically the biggest buzzword in every boardroom right now.
Exactly. And our mission today is to, well, strip away all that sustainability jargon and figure out how these contracts actually work. Why the physical reality of the grid is totally colliding with corporate accounting, and why mid-market companies are suddenly getting entirely priced out of the green energy transition.
Yeah, that contradiction you mentioned at the start, it's fundamentally driven by this collision between, well, physics and ambition. We're sitting in a moment where electricity demand is surging at a rate that is literally physically outpacing our grid infrastructure.
Because of data centers, right?
That's a huge part of it, yeah. You have this unyielding demand from data center expansion for AI, coupled with, heavy industrial electrification. But simultaneously, virtually every major corporation is accelerating their net zero commitments.
Right. They all want to be green.
Exactly. They all need immense amounts of power, and they desperately need that power to be classified as clean on their balance sheets.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because according to the 2026 report, PPAs sit right at this super volatile intersection of all those intense pressures. So let's just start at the very beginning with the anatomy of a PPA.
Sure, the basics.
Yeah, at its core, the report defines it as a long-term contract, usually 10 to 20 years, where an organization basically agrees to buy renewable electricity and its renewable energy certificates, or RECs, at a predetermined price.
Which sounds totally straightforward on paper.
Right. I mean, you pay a wind farm, you get clean energy. But here is where the greenwashing accusation usually comes in. Because anyone who understands the physical reality of the grid knows that, well, electrons follow the path of least resistance.
They absolutely do.
The grid is not like a private pipeline. There's no dedicated copper wire running from a solar farm in Texas straight to your corporate headquarters in Ohio. You aren't actually using those specific physical green electrons to power your office lights.
No, they all just get dumped into the massive shared pool of the national grid.
Exactly. So if you aren't literally powering your laptop with the green power you paid for, we really have to ask how this isn't just some elaborate accounting trick.
Well, that physical limitation is actually exactly why the environmental accounting frameworks were created in the first place. You can't track a specific electron once it enters the grid pool. It's impossible.
What do they do?
So the system relies on those RECs you mentioned. Every time a wind or solar farm generates 1 megawatt hour of clean power, and injects it into the grid, it generates 1 REC.
Yeah.
And in a PPA, the corporate buyer legally receives those RECs. Under the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, holding that specific REC is what allows a company to legally and credibly claim the environmental attributes of that power against their Scope 2 emissions.
Oh, wait, let me jump in on Scope 2 for a second, just to ground this for you listening. If Scope 1 covers the direct emissions from things you own, like, the gasoline burned in your company delivery vans, Scope 2 covers the indirect emissions from the electricity you purchase.
Right, the power plant down the road.
Exactly. It's the coal or natural gas burned 30 miles away to keep your office lights on and your servers running. So the REC is basically the receipt that proves you've funded the injection of clean energy into the world to offset that Scope 2 impact.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. But the underlying value of a PPA actually goes far deeper than just acquiring a receipt.
How so?
Well, the reason a PPA is so heavily respected and why it's considered fundamentally different from just buying random unbundled RECs on the open market comes down to this critical concept called additionality.
Additionality.
Yeah. Think about the banking reality of renewable development. Say a developer wants to build a massive 500 megawatt solar farm. That requires hundreds of millions of dollars in capital.
Obviously.
But banks will not lend them that money if the developer's only plan is to just sell power into the highly volatile, totally unpredictable daily spot market.
Right, because banks hate spot market volatility. They want guaranteed, predictable returns before they hand over $500 million.
Precisely. So the corporate buyer acts as a giant insurance policy for the bank. When a corporation signs a 15-year PPA, locking in a set rate for that power, they provide the revenue certainty that the bank requires.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. The corporate buyer's contract is the literal reason that specific wind or solar farm can secure financing and actually get built. That is additionality.
You are directly adding new clean energy to the grid that would not have existed without your signature on that contract. That makes total sense.
It really is the gold standard.
And if you go look at your own company's sustainability reports right now, you will likely see this tension playing out. The report notes that standard setters are applying intense scrutiny to unbundled RECs. Like, buying RECs from a hydro dam built in 1980 doesn't actually decarbonize the grid today.
Exactly, because it's already built.
Right. So having that direct contractual relationship through a PPA to build something new is the undisputed standard. But since we've established you aren't usually running a direct wire to your office, how exactly do these contracts execute the delivery? I mean, what are the different flavors of PPAs?
Well, there's a whole menu of options, but executing them forces companies into some highly complex logistical maneuvers.
Okay, let's break down those structures. I guess most intuitive is the physical on-site PPA.
Yes, your classic rooftop solar setup.
Right. It has very low complexity because you just put the panels on your roof and consume the power directly. But the fatal flaw for most corporations, though, is real estate. You need, like, millions of square feet of flat, unshaded warehouse roofs to make a dent in a corporate energy load.
Yeah. On-site simply cannot scale to meet modern demands. So heavy industrial users who require massive, consistent energy loads turn to physical off-site PPAs.
And how does that work?
This involves a utility-scale facility delivering power through the grid, but it requires highly specific regional setups. The 2026 report actually highlights a 100-megawatt solar installation in Elkhart County, Indiana.
Oh, yeah, I read about that one.
Right. It's supported by a long-term physical PPA with Indiana-Michigan Power. So the power is technically delivered to the buyer, but navigating the physical transmission logistics, the grid fees, the regional regulations, it requires a massive internal energy procurement team.
Which totally explains why the vast majority of the corporate market has gravitated toward the virtual PPA, or VPPA.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because in a VPPA, no physical power changes hands between the developer and the buyer.
Zero.
None at all. It is a purely financial contract. The buyer basically agrees to pay a fixed strike price for the power. The renewable generator takes the electricity they produce and just sells it directly into the local wholesale spot market at whatever the going rate happens to be that hour.
Right. They sell it locally.
And then the buyer and the generator just settle the financial difference between their fixed contract price and the fluctuating market price.
Exactly. Let's put some numbers to that to show how elegant the hedge really is. Imagine the contract strike price is $40 per megawatt hour.
Okay, $40.
If a massive heat wave spikes the wholesale spot market price to $60, the generator sells their power for $60, keeps the $40 they were guaranteed, and pays the corporate buyer the $20 difference.
Oh, wow. So the corporate buyer actually makes money.
Yes. And conversely, if the spot market price drops to $30, the buyer pays the generator the $10 difference to make them whole.
So a VPPA fundamentally means a company's acting as a financial hedge against spot market volatility.
It's exactly it.
The generator gets their guaranteed $40 to satisfy the bank, and the corporate buyer gets the precious RECs to claim their Scope 2 emissions reductions.
It's a financial swap that secures environmental attributes. And I should mention, for companies operating in heavily regulated electricity markets where VPPAs are legally complicated, the report also details sleeved PPAs.
Sleeved PAs, right?
Yeah. In a sleeved PPA, a local utility acts as the intermediary. The utility takes the renewable power, basically sleeves it into the company's existing retail energy bill, and passes the costs and RECs through. It's a middle ground.
Got it. But look, if VPPAs are this brilliant financial hedge that lets you lock in price certainty and claim additionality, it sounds like every company in the Fortune 500 should be signing one tomorrow.
You would think so.
But setting up a 15-year financial swap requires immense scale and, frankly, a massive legal budget, which leads us to that 2026 market squeeze we talked about at the top of the show.
Yes. The barrier to entry right now is staggering.
The numbers in this report genuinely shocked me. Like we said, global clean energy procurement volumes actually fell 10% in 2025. Yet amidst that contraction, the big tech hyperscalers, Meta, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, made up nearly half of all the PPA deals that were signed.
Half. It's wild.
We are watching the hyperscalers absolutely eat the market while everyone else retreats.
And that drop in volume from everyone else is a direct reflection of macroeconomic realities.
Yeah.
High interest rates, supply chain bottlenecks for things like transformers, and soaring labor costs have made building renewable projects incredibly expensive.
Right.
Developers had to raise their PPA asking prices dramatically over the last 3 years just to cover costs. And when prices went up, the risk profile changed and normal companies pulled out. But the tech giants didn't.
Because they're playing a completely different game. They have infinite treasuries, they have these outsized energy demands from AI, and they literally have whole internal divisions dedicated to energy trading.
Exactly. They essentially turned clean energy procurement into a billionaire's game.
Yeah, and the report outlines a brutal reality for normal companies. To even seriously consider entering a PPA, an organization generally needs an annual load of at least 5 to 10 gigawatt hours.
Which is massive.
Yeah, to put 10 gigawatt hours in perspective, that is roughly the annual electricity usage of 1,000 average American homes.
Yeah.
If you're a mid-sized software company or, regional manufacturer, your load is a fraction of
A
that.
tiny fraction, yeah.
The sheer transaction costs and the accounting complexity of a PPA simply will not make financial sense. So if you are sitting in a procurement seat right now and your leadership team comes to you saying, hey, we need a quick ESG win for the annual report, go sign a virtual PPA, you're being set up to fail.
Oh, absolutely. You will get crushed by the market. A PPA is not a public relations exercise. I mean, it is a highly complex, decades-long energy trading strategy.
Yes.
It requires a finance team with serious tolerance for long-term price risk exposure. The market today is just significantly less forgiving of underprepared buyers than it was during the whole buying boom a few years ago.
Let's dive right into that lack of forgiveness. Because if mid-market buyers are trying to compete with Meta and Google, they might be rushing into contracts without realizing the trap doors.
Yeah.
What are the risks these glossy vendor brochures just casually leave out?
Well, the most glaring physical risk right now is delivery shortfalls caused by interconnection delays. When you sign a PPA, the vendor promises a specific commercial operation, date the day the wind farm will be up and running. But let's look at the data from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab cited in the report.
Okay, let's hear it.
By the end of 2025, there were over 2,060 gigawatts of generation and storage capacity actively stuck in the U.S. grid connection queue.
Wait, just to contextualize, 2,060 gigawatts. The entire functioning operating capacity of the U.S. power grid is only around 1,200 gigawatts.
Right.
We have nearly double the current U.S. grid's capacity just sitting in a bureaucratic waiting room asking for permission to plug in.
Yes, it is a massive physical bottleneck. The median wait time from when a project requests interconnection to when it actually achieves commercial operations has more than doubled. In the early 2000s, it was under 2 years. Today, it is over 4 years.
Wow. And I was reading the fine print of the contracts executed during that 2021 frenzy in the report, and it blew my mind how developers are shifting this risk.
Oh, the force majeure clauses?
Yes. You would think that if the developer's 4 years late, they pay a massive penalty to the buyer. That's just standard contract law.
Yeah.
But developers have started using incredibly broad definitions of force majeure.
Which is crazy because force majeure is typically reserved for literal acts of God, like hurricanes or unforeseen wars, that excuse a party from fulfilling their contract.
Right. But these developers are defining grid queue delays as an excusable force majeure event.
Yeah, the legal maneuvering is incredibly aggressive. If the contract defines a regional interconnection delay as supplier-excused non-performance, the developer is completely off the hook. They aren't in default. They pay zero penalties.
Meanwhile, the corporate buyer, who built their entire operational budget around receiving that fixed price power in 2026, is suddenly totally stranded. They are forced to go out and buy replacement power on the open spot market at whatever crazy rates currently dictate.
Exactly. The buyer takes on all the downside of a delayed project, while the developer sits safely behind a legal shield. But, even if the project does get built and plugged in on time, the financial risk for virtual PPAs are mutating.
You're talking about basis risk.
Yes. The report highlights basis risk as the hidden killer of the virtual PPA hedge. To understand it, we need to look at how grid pricing physically works. The spot market price is not a single, uniform national number. It varies wildly depending on the physical location or the node where the power is injected into the grid versus the node where the wholesale market price is officially settled. Basis risk is the price differential between those two specific geographic nodes.
Let's use an analogy here to make it clearer. Think of a regional grid, like ERCOT in Texas, as a massive walled-off highway system. You could build a giant wind farm, which acts like an on-ramp in a remote part of West Texas where land is cheap.
Sure.
But if the transmission highway leading to the high-demand cities is already jammed bumper to bumper with electrons, your power literally cannot merge into traffic.
That is a great analogy. And that highway congestion completely fractures the financial settlement of the VPPA. The corporate buyer's contract usually settles against a heavily traded, high-demand hub price. Let's call it the city center.
Okay.
But the wind farm is generating power out at a remote node. According to Bloomberg NEF's 2025 analysis, grid congestion has caused the price difference between these remote generation nodes and the settlement hubs to absolutely explode.
So if the highway is completely blocked, what actually happens to the price at the remote node where the wind farm sits?
Well, during peak congestion events, the nodal price goes negative.
Wait, negative, meaning the wind farm is producing electricity, and instead of getting paid for it, they literally have to pay the grid operator to take the electrons away.
Yes, the grid operator has to financially penalize generation to prevent the physical wires from melting due to oversupply in that specific localized area.
Oh, man.
Now, connect that back to the VPPA. If your financial settlement is tied to a project experiencing negative nodal pricing, the project isn't generating revenue, it is hemorrhaging cash. And under the terms of the VPPA, who is on the hook to make the generator whole for the difference between the strike price and the market price?
The corporate buyer.
Exactly.
The buyer has to pay the developer the $40 strike price, plus cover the negative market penalty.
You are covering immense losses. The volatility in the energy market didn't magically disappear because a corporation signed a 15-year financial swap. The risk simply moved off the utility commodity desk and quietly migrated onto the corporate balance sheet.
Disguised as basis risk and counterparty exposure.
Exactly. The volatility hides in the performance variance of the physical grid, and it stays hidden until the quarterly settlement period makes it painfully visible to the CFO.
So what does this all mean? It means the promised land of zero volatility was basically a marketing myth. The physical constraints of the grid will always dictate the financial reality of the contract.
Always.
Which means we need to leave you, our listener, with a concrete action plan. If you are sitting in that boardroom and the executive team is pushing to sign a PPA to hit a 2030 net zero target, how do you protect your organization before you ever engage a developer?
Well, the report establishes a highly rigorous checklist. First, you must exhaustively quantify your actual physical electricity consumption by specific grid region. You cannot use national averages. Second, you must secure independent legal counsel with deep expertise in energy trading. You need lawyers who specifically understand how these force majeure clauses are currently being litigated regarding regional interconnection delays.
Because they need to spot the trapdoors before the ink dries.
Precisely. And third, if you are looking at a virtual PPA, you must demand a minimum 3-year historical nodal pricing analysis for the exact physical delivery location of the proposed project.
So you can actually see the basis risk.
Yes, you need to see the empirical data on grid congestion before you take on a decade of financial exposure.
You just cannot blindly trust the vendor's rosy pricing models. Well, you have been an incredible guide through a landscape that is clearly far more complex and dangerous than the sustainability brochures suggest.
Thanks for having me. It's a tough market to navigate.
It really is. But I want to leave you, our listener, with one final provocative thought to mull over. Something that builds on this intense tension between corporate financial ambition and our physical infrastructure.
I'd love to hear it.
If corporate PPAs are successfully driving the creation of all these massive new wind and solar farms, providing the billions of dollars in banking security needed to build them, but the physical grid itself is taking over 4 years just to process the paperwork to plug them in. What happens when a company's 15-year locked-in financial contract outlasts the physical usefulness of the localized power grid it relies on? Are we trading necessary environmental progress for an incoming wave of stranded, financially toxic corporate assets?
That is the big question.
It really is. Keep digging into your company's sustainability plans. Keep asking questions and keep demanding to know exactly how the physics of the grid impact your financial hedges. And remember, we are always here to help you unpack the next big topic. Until next time.